I can't imagine video games without mods. Whether it be aesthetic mods, gameplay mods, new assets, quality of life features, something as big as an entirely new storyline, or something as simple as some new portraits for an RPG, there's always room for eyes on the outside to contribute and improve already good experiences. But mod implementation isn't necessarily easy, so we're going to talk about the how and why of getting mods right.
Hey Gage, I think you forgot something.
I know how modding works the same way I know how an internal combustion engine works. I could explain it, I could draw a picture, but I couldn't put one together if you put the tools and the parts in front of me unless I had a really good manual in about 10 years. I've made a couple really basic mods for Fallout 4, mostly changing the property of clothing mods I felt were OP, really just some copy paste type stuff. Most complex thing I did was write a mod to solve a conflict between two other mods. If you looked at my Fallout mod order, they're there, but they're only one ladder rung above just using Fallout Edit. But while Bethesda is basically the benchmark for modding, there are a few other things I'd like to go through, so we'll circle back to Bethesda in a bit. EA is a better place to start. I have a bad habit of going on long tangents, so let's skip the politics on this one. EA treats mods like they don't exist. They haven't really done anything to foster a modding community, but they're not actively at war with it either. Frostbite can be modded, but doing so is convoluted to say the least. As I said before, I have only a tertiary understanding of modding, so I'll use an analogy to sound smarter than I actually am. If a game's code is spaghetti, in a Bethesda game, a mod is like a meatball. It's there, but it's still very decidedly separate. In Frostbite, the mod is more like a sauce. Where the mod ends and the original code begins is more ambiguous. Modding Frostbite is a lot more, let's say, EULA adjacent than it is with a Bethesda game. And I don't think EA would have much trouble torpedoing the whole thing if they really wanted to. But they don't. What's interesting in EA's case is how they handle the mods in any of the Sims games. It seems to have its own very welcoming policy, despite the fact that mods directly compete with EA's own DLC, for which, in the case of Sims 4, there's over $1,000 of. I suppose they feel that any engagement is good engagement, which seems like a bit of a no-brainer when you say it out loud. Maybe mods will cannibalize sales of some DLCs, but drive sales of others. Consider the DLC Get Together. It's rather unremarkable on its own, but a particular romance mod integrates with it directly. I'm sure that it being the best-selling DLC for The Sims 4 is purely coincidental. They certainly could do more to foster the modding scene, but sometimes nothing isn't the worst you can do. There was a time when Rockstar was pretty open to mods. That changed the moment they felt it would affect their income stream. Yeah, I didn't feel like tiptoeing around that one. Let's talk about Open 4. If you think I'm willing to piss off half the people out there and take a side, you don't know me very well. I'm going to piss off everyone and say both sides handled that poorly. So Rockstar was having trouble with people modding GTA Online. So they banned the modding framework Open 4. They were quickly criticized because Open 4 was designed to only modify the single-player portion of the game. Rockstar's reply was that most of the modding, well, cheating on the multiplayer side of things, was done by taking Open 4 and applying patches to it that allowed it to also modify the multiplayer portion of the game. While Open 4 wasn't designed to modify the multiplayer, it itself could be modded so that it could. Rockstar claimed that they'd been playing whack-a-mole with these patches for months, and that they were able to create their own in a few hours. The modding community responded by, well, I'm not sure. It just wasn't covered. Gaming news channels, however, merely kept banging the "it's a single-player modding tool" drum without addressing Rockstar's comment at all. I don't know who's right. And while it's a couple years past now, I'd still be very curious what the modding community had to say in response to Rockstar's comments. I only heard the one side, and that rarely leads to understanding. If you know, please let us know in the comments. This is regardless of whether or not you agree with them. So if someone is explaining this in the comments, don't tear into them unless they make it clear they're weighing in with their opinion as well. Of course, If Rockstar really wanted to be pragmatic, they could have just made the modding tool, even the architecture, themselves. Someone trying to create such a tool from the outside looking in is impressive to say the least, but it seems multitudes more difficult than it would have been for Rockstar to do it. Much like iTunes replaced Napster despite the fact it cost money, if Rockstar built and maintained the tool themselves, people would have just used that, and it would have been far easier to keep it from interacting with the multiplayer functions. Not supporting the modding community led to a modding community they had no control of, and we were all the worse off for it. Or they could have just allowed private servers. But if that 13-year-old didn't have anyone to troll, he'd stop swiping daddy's credit card, and I'm pretty sure that's like 95% of their revenue. Next up, a company that gets a bit weird about it. I'm going to put this in big letters here. I do not condone modding multiplayer games unless everyone knows about it and is okay with it. If you and your buddies want to run a dozen mods on a private server, there's no ethical issue there. If you want to hop on a public server with infinite health, you've gone from modder to hacker. A gardener explained to me once the difference between a regular plant and a weed. And the only difference is that a weed is a plant you don't want there. You know what the difference between a modder and a hacker is? You don't want the hacker there. If you're modding a multiplayer game without everyone's consent, you're not welcome. I didn't want anyone to think I didn't know why From Software takes such a stance as this. But were they right? Elden Ring is the kind of game that could have been massive in modding scope. The world is the kind of canvas that modders absolutely could work wonders with. And what they already do despite the controls is impressive. There are full rebalancings, even the ability to play not just the bosses, but the whole game in co-op. But is any of this worth it if it allows people playing the regular game to cheat? Well, no. No, people bought the game with an expectation, and facilitating that expectation is paramount. But here's the rub. The hackers are getting in anyway, and that kinda nullifies the entire argument. This debate surfaces whenever you see anti-cheat or anti-piracy software added to a game. The people it impacts are not the people who are the problem. It's like using a rifle to deal with mice. It's not going to work, and your neighbors aren't going to be thrilled. Of course, like with Rockstar, if they had led it, they could have had control over the direction of the modding scene. They could have made it easy to shut down the online component so people could play a modded version offline and the vanilla version online. They could have allowed private hosting for modded multiplayer. Elden Ring could have been so much more without compromising the original experience at all. Or maybe we would have gotten hackers, which we have anyway. I'll concede that moderating mods in a game with multiplayer elements will always be difficult, and while something being difficult doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, some could argue that the effort could be better spent elsewhere. I would disagree, but only to the extent that I'd spend 5 minutes of a YouTube video rambling about it. Either way, it was an important part of the discussion, and now we can get back to modding single-player games, and that means we get back to Bethesda. Modding games didn't slowly become a thing for Bethesda. It exploded with Morrowind and has grown exponentially ever since. Take a look at the most modded games on Nexus. Skyrim isn't just the most modded game out there, it's the first and second. Even Starfield is on there. As I mentioned before, I've made mods for Fallout 4, and I have zero background with this type of thing. Couple that with the open worlds and the moral ambiguity of single player, you get a blank canvas, and it's not surprising they became what they are today. I still find myself feeling defensive when people say they didn't like Fallout 4, because I keep forgetting that a lot of people still play it without mods. I forget that I didn't even buy it until a modder had fixed the dialogue wheel. Heck, I didn't even like vanilla Skyrim. I thought it was dull. I don't think Bethesda understands this. I think what's most telling is how they'll come out with an update 10 years later, breaking mod lists across the entire PC demographic. It's enough of a problem that we've learned to swap Steam to offline mode, then boot off the EXE just in case there's been an update every time we play it. We shouldn't have to do this. I doubt I'm the only one who's had an update brick our entire playthrough because we had the audacity to accidentally launch the game with the big play button. I just looked now, and apparently my version is currently flagged for an update, which means it's questionable if I'll be able to play any of my saves, even if I do remember to use the EXE. And I think we all know why they do this. 10 years in, they're not doing bug fixes, they're updating their damn shop. They see all those mods, and they want to monetize them. They really want to monetize them. They just have no idea how to do it, and every time they try, it goes badly for them. There's a disconnect between how things work in the physical and the software markets. If I sell a set of tires to someone, I'm sure as hell not giving a cut to the car's manufacturer. The mere idea of that seems crazy. If they want to sell cars, they'll need an infrastructure to keep those cars on the road, or people won't buy the cars. That's what they get from me. If they want more, well, they can bite me. On the software side, things work different. Every time a game is sold on PlayStation or Xbox, Sony or Microsoft take a cut. I do not understand why publishers put up with this. If the publisher stepped forward and said, yeah, we're not doing that anymore, do you think Sony and Microsoft would be like, oh, well, I guess we just won't have games then? I imagine Rockstar itself has enough clout to just say they're not going to pay anymore, but that they still expect downloads to be hosted on Sony and Microsoft servers. You're going to be okay with GTA 6 not launching on your console? But it's in this market you have Bethesda, who think they deserve a cut of mods because they made the game, the architecture that allows the mod to exist. Meanwhile, the rational world is thinking, you got your cut when we bought the game. These modders are making your product more appealing to a larger audience. That's your cut. So now we have Starfield, which, according to the modders I chatted with while doing the Fallout New Vegas stuff, is a real pain to make mods for. I can't help but feel that Bethesda figured that if they couldn't turn the mods into a revenue stream, they didn't need to bother making the game accessible to them. How's that going, Bethesda? So with the heyday of Bethesda modding disappearing in the rearview mirror, and Kerbal Space Program and City Skylines and their sequels being a tangent beyond the scope of this video, is anyone doing modding well? Well, of course. And it'll surprise no one where we find it. There's a saying that second best always tries harder, so it's in the world of AA and indie games we see the most willing reception to mods. Project Zomboid, for instance, has a mod menu built right into the game. Most of the content you see in the game started its life as a mod. You don't even have to uninstall a mod if you don't want it there anymore. You just turn it off in the main menu. Factorio has its own mod servers. When you talk about your current Factorio playthrough, one of the first things you'll say is what world mod you're using. But RimWorld, please stand up and take these flowers. RimWorld links what mod you're using to your save file. So when you load a save file with the wrong mod list, it can let you know so you can fix it. Oh wait, no, it asks you if you want it to hit the Steam community lists and sorts out the mods for you. You don't even have to remember what mods match up to what save file. You can have 5 different games saved with different lists, and it keeps track, even when you're saving to the cloud. To call this a gold standard is a compliment to gold. So what do these games have in common? Well, they took one look at the modding community and decided to crowd surf it. No matter how good your game is, there will always be someone who says they could have done it better. Usually they're full of it. But sometimes they're actually onto something. And sometimes they actually know how to do it. And sometimes they're willing to do it for free. And you'd be crazy to do anything less than embrace them with open arms. Because that's how you do mods right. Keep dancing, little guys.